Go.
So we open our meeting with a land acknowledgement. And Watertown Citizens for Peace, Justice, and the Environment acknowledges that the residents of Watertown live on land that is the traditional territory of the Pequawset people, a band of the indigenous Massachusetts tribe. The Pequawset cared for and stewarded this land for hundreds of generations. The English language rendering of the indigenous name of Watertown is Pigsgusset, which to the best of our knowledge means the meadows at the widening of the river. We recognize that indigenous erasure and attempted genocide are still happening today and demand supportive action and solidarity. Let us remember the achievements of Pigsgusset peoples and the ongoing struggles of their descendants as we reflect on how we can be good visitors and stewards of this place we call home. So moving on to working group reports. If Watertown Faces Climate Change would kick us off. Deborah, did you want to report?
Sure, I can do that. Well, we're very busy as usual. The high school reconstruction plans are starting to solidify, although many things are still up in the air, including the net zero. We've showed up in numbers at a town council subcommittee advocating for the town to adopt organic waste and responsible recycling. We're showing up at a variety of development meetings and planning board meetings to advocate that new developments.
Would people mind muting? Thank you.
So making sure developments go above and beyond the town requirements. And we're looking for more shuttles and net zero in new developments. There are more advocacy opportunities to keep the 71 and 73 buses electric. We're working with WE3C on oversight of the town's climate action plan. And we were disappointed that the town council, unlike most other communities, did not embrace the Sunrise resolution to declare a climate emergency. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Friends of Bees Working Group. Pam, can you give us a report? Are you here? Yes, you are.
Sure. So I've been just sharing more places, the pollinator garden document that I put together. I just sent it to Watertown Community Gardens, and they're gonna be putting it in their next newsletter. And I'm going to send it to Buckingham, Browns and Nichols. I attended the big meeting last week. I forget when it was. The one about where the community is trying to get them to not put artificial turf on their new playing fields. And the one bright spot that I heard was that they want to make the landscaping more pollinator friendly and add some trees. So I'm going to send them my recommendations for what kind of trees would be good for pollinators. And I'm starting to see word of the various local plant sales are starting up. So I just updated our list of the annual seedling sales that people can get vegetables and flowers and perennials from. And I just posted that on, it's right on our website. And that's it.
Hey, thank you. I will give a brief report on behalf of the Refugee Support Group. We've been busy starting to work on preparations for this fundraiser that we're going to be having in June with Yo-Yo Ma supporting us. This will be very exciting. And we've also been helping with some emergency situations with some of our families that we help, including an undocumented family that just basically became so behind on rent and bills and everything else that they're at risk of getting things shut off and getting booted out. And so we've been helping, trying to put that together and applications for programs that can assist them, which hopefully will be taken care of quickly. And then one of our other people we've been helping for the past year alongside the Watertown Mutual Aid Network, this man finally got into, he was been back and forth after surgery in several shelters. and he finally got into Watertown Public Housing, which is really exciting. So he is just happy, as you can imagine, to have a place to live and not be on the street. So that's basically what we've been up to in the last month. Eric, Watertown Citizens for Black Lives update.
Certainly. This will be pretty short because our two most active groups, one is focused on police policy reform and the other on supporting racial equity in the Watertown Public Schools. And the police policy reform group is part of the joint police reform group that's going to present today. So that's where a lot of the action's been. There was, and getting ready for the Public Safety Committee meeting tomorrow night, but they'll talk about that today. For the schools, we're very excited to have the Director of Equity and Inclusion having been hired. There are some other staffing changes in the schools that have, I believe, not been posted, so I don't know what to say about those at the moment, except there's quite a lot going on in the schools that's related to some of the issues that we've been pursuing. Sheila, on the schools, is there something to report?
Hi, everyone. I'm Sheila. There's nothing, I guess, that I can think of at the moment. One of the, I guess, pieces of sad news is Candace Whitmore, who was the only Black principal in the district, is now leaving and taking a job as a principal at a different elementary school. So it's unfortunate that we can't retain staff of color, but we hope that the open positions, that there will be good efforts for recruitment.
All right, anything else, Eric? You're muted.
No, thank you. That's the end of it. Thanks very
Okay.
much.
Sure. And for our newest working group, the Pigs Gusset Initiative, Jennifer, would you like to give us an update?
Sure. I haven't really prepared much of anything. I would say that the Pigs Gusset Initiative is working on, since we're a new group, sort of getting our structure and figuring out what we're doing piece together. We are working with the New Rep Theater for a moving play that will be coming up in June that has an all-native team from the Wampanoag tribe. And we're very excited about that. There'll be more information coming out soon about people being able to attend the event. And it will be on land behind the Commander's Mansion. So that's sort of our main focus at this point. We are also still discussing how to address the Columbus Delta in Watertown Center and looking at other public spaces and the town seal and other issues related to Indigenous erasure. So there are some other people from the Pigs Gusset Initiative here. If I missed anything, feel free to jump in and add in.
I would just add that the Pigs Gusset Initiative and Watertown Citizens for Black Lives very quickly put together a letter in response to the racist sticker that some of you may know about that was found with the old, 8 years now old or more, old mascot. So a sticker of a Native American with a tomahawk and holding a Blue Lives Matter kind of flag that was posted in Victory Field. And so there's been a pretty impressive response quickly from several working groups and others to get that word out. And actually, Michie Lesser was able to get a letter printed in the Boston Globe in response to that incident, a really excellent letter. And I think the group is hoping to publicize this even more in the context of the kinds of racism that's in our community. And trying to...
And just to tag along with that, thank you, Sue Ellen, for adding that in. that if people have subscriptions to the Boston Globe, if you want to comment on Mishy's letter, that will also get it spread more widely. And we're also looking at getting that information into the Watertown Median Press as well.
All right. Thank you, Jennifer. So that's a wrap up on our brief working group reports. And now it's,
Sue Ellen, may I just there was a message in the chat. We want to invite people who are not only using their initials to put their names in. And of course, if you don't want to put your video on, that's fine, but it would be nice to invite you to participate by telling us who you are. You don't have to, but I think it would be a nice step. Okay.
thank you, Tony. So in this order, I just wanted to briefly give people an overview of a picture of what the Watertown Joint Police Reform Group is, in case some of you don't know. So an alliance created by 3 different teams happened, including Uplift Watertown, the Kingian Response Team, which formed after the murder of George Floyd and has been doing all kinds of initiatives, and projects have come out of the Kingian Initiative, and Watertown Citizens for Black Lives. So there have been 4 particular projects and initiatives and things that we've been working on together. And all of them have the mission of trying to bring more accountability and transparency to Watertown Police Department, from the Watertown Police Department to our community. So that is basically what the Joint Police Reform Group has been doing. And there'll be representatives from each of those initiatives presenting and talking, and then there'll be a time afterwards to remember to please mute, or I can't tell who to mute, where the noise is coming from. Thanks. So we are going to start off, and if each person who's presenting can just identify yourself, and we'll go ahead. So the first will be Watertown Citizens for Black Lives. And I'm not sure what order the 3 people who are presenting have decided, but Sheila Krishna, Felicia Sullivan, and Sarah Elting are going to present on behalf of that group and their initiatives.
Thanks, Sue Ellen. So I'll go ahead and start. I don't believe Sarah Elting is present. I think she's under the weather. So it's just Sheila and myself. So hi, everybody. So I am on the leadership circle for the Watertown Citizens for Black Lives. And I'm actually the chair of the Police Policy Reform Group that was formed over the summer in response to the reaction of what happened publicly with George Floyd, plus all of the other murders of Black people that has happened over the years. So our goal of the Police Policy Reform Group was just to evaluate and respond to what Watertown is doing. And our concern was that the response was not, didn't demonstrate an understanding of the need to really self-reflect on the department and look internally and evaluate policies and procedures and make sure that there's a public trust rebuilt in the process. So what we ended up doing is taking a look at the police department's policies. In particular, we looked at their use of force policy, and we also secured some data, which is part of our presentation. The review of the data did result in some disparities that we'll review with you in our presentation. And we did have an opportunity in our group to actually meet with the police department. Lieutenant Unsworth from Watertown Police Department has been with us for a couple of times. We've met with the District Attorney, Marion Ryan, and we are, but nonetheless, we feel like there's still more progress that needs to be made. And in particular, there's a disparity that needs to be addressed. So I'll go ahead and Sheila, are you going to control the slide deck for our presentation, and you want to start going through slides?
Yeah, I just need the host to give me share screen. Oh, there we go. Great. Thank you so much. Can everyone see that?
Yep.
Yep. Okay, great. So I wanted to start with this slide first before we dive into data, just because I think it's really important to not look at data in a vacuum. And I know that everybody kind of comes to these conversations about racism, about disparities, about data at different starting points. And so I really wanted to name the 4 I's of oppression that are used often in social justice trainings used by the Racial Equity Institute, which is a wonderful organization that some of us have been able to attend trainings through. So I wanted to name this first, that the 4 I's of oppression are individual, interpersonal, institutional, and ideological. And individual can also include internalized oppression. And I think it's really important that when we're talking about data and disparities, we're not attributing any kind of moral quality or judgment. We're just looking at the numbers and we're looking at trends on a population level. So I know it's really easy to feel defensive or attacked, or to remember the positive interactions that people have had with police. And we believe that both of these things can exist. So I just want to name that as really the framing of how we're talking about the data. As Felicia said, this group came together last year. There was a forum last June that Chief Lawn held with Senator Will Brownsberger. And in that forum, he stated that no disparity had been brought to his attention, and he welcomed people to get in touch with him if they discovered a disparity. So that made our group very curious. We did a public records request, and we first received the data that's in the column on the left. So the total arrests by race, resident and non-resident, the total citations by race, the total field inquiries by race, and a summary of accreditation standards. We got this data for the past back to 2017, so a few years of data so that we could make some comparisons. Subsequently, we have met with Chief Lawn, who has obviously additional data he provided, so a breakdown of arrests to differentiate between probable cause versus warrant. You might have heard him talk about discretionary arrest. So it gets kind of complicated when a police officer has to arrest somebody because of a warrant or because of domestic violence versus a discretionary arrest. And then a highly detailed breakdown of arrests of the Black population, and then total citations by race, resident and non-resident, and then the overall call volume and the number of calls that result in arrests. The data that we still have not received is a breakdown of arrests by the white population. So why this is important is if you're going to talk about the breakdown of arrests by the Black population, you need to be able to compare. And then also detailed data on call outcomes by race, breakdown of police initiated versus call initiated arrests by race, and then the documentation submitted for the accreditation process. So these are some of the challenges with data and data sharing that we really want to see improved and that we think is really important for transparency and accountability. So right now, there doesn't seem to be any central database. When we do this request, we were told that this data had to be pulled by hand and that that's a very heavy administrative burden. So in 2021, with all of the access to data analysis and tools, we really need to step up our systems in data management. Also missing important information. So again, police initiated versus public initiated arrest when somebody calls and the reason for arrest. There were also inconsistencies in race and ethnicity as they were documented in the data. And so it was impossible to examine some of the disparities beyond the white and Black data, even though that the report itself says that Hispanic individuals are also overrepresented. So we'll get to that in a moment. And then the data have not been shared with the public. So Chief Lawn has said they have been compiling this report since 2014, and this was the first time a records request was made. So we believe that this data should be readily shared on the website without the public having to make a records request in order to increase transparency and accountability. I think in terms of the accountability, we also don't have a reasonable definition of equity in policing. So we can go back and forth on the numbers, but I think it's really important to determine what are the disparities that would be a cause for alarm in the Watertown Police Department. What does the community consider as a disparity, and what does equitable policing look like in Watertown? And frankly, it would be incredibly surprising if the police department did not have a racial disparity in their arrests and citations. If you look at every institution, education, healthcare, there are disparities because that is a result of systemic racism. So if they had no disparity, I would want to know, what magic they have over there. There's also 5 assumptions about police data and disparities that we often come across. So when we're talking about a disparity, we don't know what the cause is. One possible conclusion could be racial bias or racism. There are also probably many other contributing factors. There's another assumption that's often made that Black people just commit more crimes, and this is completely untrue. And I'm happy to provide a whole list of literature and citations that show that that's just not true. There's also a comment that was made about proportionality to the population is not a realistic standard. So when you say Black people are represented at arrest compared to the population, well, that is the standard that is used, and that is the standard that the police department cites in their reports. So if there's a different standard, we would welcome knowing how people look at that. Also, it's been said that no complaints may mean there isn't a problem. Well, I think we all know why people wouldn't report, why people in workplaces don't report, why people in schools don't report. There's so many reasons. And if you don't believe your complaint will be taken seriously, then why would you report? So that isn't really an indicator of there not being a problem. Lastly, that the disparity is, only due to policing of non-residents because, they're shoplifting at the mall or there's commuting through Watertown. I think this is also a really important point that it doesn't really matter if it's residents or non-residents. Does Watertown really want to have a reputation as a place that's unfriendly to Black people to come in, to shop, to use the amenities, all of those reasons. So if they are over-policed, that is also a problem. So I'm going to go into, I'm sorry if I'm going over time. If somebody could just let me know if I'm talking too much or when to cut me off.
I think we're okay.
Okay. So Sarah Elting, who couldn't be here with us today, is a data engineer. She did the analysis of the data. She looked at the frequency of arrests by race and compared the arrest data to the Watertown population data. In follow-up to our request, the police department did more of an in-depth analysis of their data, and they shared their field contact annual analysis 2018 and 2019 reports. This is a box from that report where it says African American individuals are overrepresented in all 3 categories. You'll also notice it says Hispanic individuals are overrepresented in arrest numbers and field inquiries. So our question was, if this is a report that's been collected since 2014 with this statement, what is being done to remedy this? And that's, one of the important things that we looked at. So this is, you might have heard the statistic that Black Watertown residents are 5 times more likely to be arrested than white Watertown residents. So that comes from looking at a total number of 139 resident arrests in 2018 and 141 resident arrests in 2019. So there were 14 Black residents arrested in 2018 and 18 Black residents arrested in 2019. So that's how we came to those numbers. And you'll see here, this is the prevalence rate per 1,000 residents that's shown in this bar graph. So we know that these are patterns that are seen in other neighboring towns as well. As I said, it would be surprising if it wasn't here. That's just how systemic racism operates.
Just to add to what Sheila said, sorry, briefly, is that yes, it's seen in neighboring towns, but what we've seen in looking at other towns like Newton and Belmont is they're actually making steps or taking steps to address those disparities or having a public conversation, and there's actual transparency happening in both the government, in the city or town, as well as in the police department.
Thanks, Felicia. So these are 4 of the overall 10 proposed initiatives that the Joint Police Reform Group put together. These 4 come from the WCBL group. So the first one was we want the Watertown Police Department to think of implementing a program to remedy, deter, and decrease disproportionate arrests and citations of people of color. I believe one of their attempts to do this is the jail diversion program, which is a wonderful program that Chief Lon has talked about, but we think that there's more that can be done. Next, the sharing of data relating to race. There's really a lot of improvement that needs to be done on the data management and analysis, and possibly an independent party outside of the police department who could have a role and who has expertise in that. And then the next two are related to the state police reform bill. And in terms of the use of force policy, the police department use of force policy will have to be updated to reflect the state policy. There's also the campaigns 8 Can't Wait and Campaign 0 that talk about use of force as well. And then internal investigations. So the state reform bill established the Post Commission, where internal complaints will be reported to. And I know Felicia's going to get into these a little bit more, so I'm just going to hand it over to her now.
Okay, so just going into the areas of disparity in the use of force policy. So these are areas on this slide where there is a difference between what the Watertown Police Department's use of force policy reflects as well compared to the state reform law. Just a note though, they do have until the end of the calendar year to comply with these requirements. So, I mean, it's something that we anticipate will happen over time, but just want to flag for you areas where we need to make sure that there is compliance. There's not really you won't see an enforcement mechanism right away. So I think it's important that we keep an eye on these things. So in particular, the chokeholds. Chokeholds are absolutely prohibited in the reform law. They're not allowed to shoot at fleeing individuals. And Watertown Police Department policy allows it if they believe a violent felony would occur if apprehension is delayed. And then also use of canines. The police department allows individuals to be apprehended using a canine if they're assaultive and fleeing. And the reform law only allows it if de-escalation has been attempted. And so there's just a difference in when the canine may be used. And then additionally, as far as investigation of complaints and incidents, there's not a requirement in the Watertown Police Department policy for independent review, but right now it's actually being, investigations are occurring internally with the chief being the sign off of those complaints. And that is actually something that we requested as part of our public records request. So the new law has a separate investigation process. That's great. New requirement. And then also just the public disclosure of officers' disciplinary records, incidents, and investigations. Watertown Police Department policy does not currently provide public disclosure of this information. And, the reform law establishes a public database of this information. So there's been a lot of great things in the reform law that, need to be incorporated into the Watertown Police Department policies. And I know they are working on them. I want to make sure that I acknowledge that we did meet with Watertown Police Department and they have told us that these are things that they're aware of and they're looking into.
I insulted when you said, I hope you didn't say that out loud.
Someone can go to the next slide.
Alice, can you please mute Alice?
Enough to say it out loud.
Okay, so going to the reform law provisions that may require other Watertown Police Department changes. The new police reform law limits the no-knock warrants. So for those of you who don't know what a no-knock warrant means, that's you can get authorization from a judge to go straight into an location if you have a warrant without actually knocking. That was what the Breonna Taylor situation involved. For those of you who are aware of that very public case, and there's limitations on that now under the state reform law. Additionally, there's limitations on the roles and posting of school resource officers. So school resource officers are those police officers who are in the public schools who are there to assist the the schools when there are issues, but there is evidence that having police officers in the schools creates a cradle to prison pipeline is what the terminology is. So that kind of ban is important. Limitation is important. And then there's also a ban on racial profiling on all law enforcement actions. So racial profiling means if you're targeting a certain racial or ethnic group, if there's evidence of that, that's prohibited under the new law. And then there's requirements, training requirements, one of them being in de-escalation, which is minimizing the type of force that's used, making efforts to reduce harm, but it's very tricky. And so there is requirements for training in that area. And then cultural competency. So being knowledgeable of other cultures, other ethnic, racial groups, being able to address them appropriately. And then recommendations of community policing and behavioral health council to expand non-police resources and crisis interventions teams. So that just relates to addressing, there's more of an emphasis on addressing mental health than there has been in the past. So this is really great news to have this, but again, something we really need to keep an eye on and make sure that Watertown is complying with. And this slide here is actually, some quotes from the neighboring towns. Like I mentioned earlier, there have been pretty great responses in other towns to the racial justice initiatives and George Floyd and all of the other incidents that have happened across America. And, Belmont Police Chief James McIsaac. I'm not going to read all of these, but you can see these quotes here. They are taking steps. Chief McIsaac says, "We will always make ourselves available to anyone who has concerns or questions regarding operations, tactics, and how we interact with the public." I mean, that's huge. I think community engagement is critical. It helps build a relationship between the town and its citizens. And, the Chief Mintz says we're all products of socialization. We grew up in an environment where there have been difficult issues regarding race and race relations. So a lot of training is geared to make sure it doesn't interfere with our judgment. So that's in Newton, acknowledging the, white supremacy culture that we live in. And then Chief Bard out of Cambridge, he said, he said arrest disparity data collected as part of the law is necessary to analyze in the broader context of policing. And he said his department is committed to reversing racial disparities in arrests. We live in a society where race permeates everything we do. So just an acknowledgement that this is the society that we live in, and this is what policing is built off of is really important and would help, improve public trust. All right, so our questions for you and for the questions that will raise tomorrow is, what questions does this data raise for you, and what else do you want to know about police operations and services?
Thank you, Felicia and Sheila. Our plan was to have all 4 presentations happen, and people can save their questions, and then you can also either put them in the chat or use the hand option for letting us know that you want to have a question and would like to ask that question. So next is Uplift Watertown. Will give us an update on their work.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm part of Uplift Watertown. We are a group of residents who care about making sure everyone in the community's needs are met. And we also came together in June 2020 after the murder of George Floyd. So I'll share a few updates on what different teams in our organization are doing. So our core leadership is reassessing and framing our vision, mission, and value statement. It's almost finalized. Currently, our vision is we envision a radical reimagining of public safety wherein Watertown has moved away from punitive reactions to harm and toward solutions which are life-affirming and transform the conditions which perpetuate harm in the first place. We're also in the early stages of intentionally bringing in some more transformative justice teachings into our organizing and meeting spaces. So we have an education, social media, and data teams. Our education team has been holding anti-racism trainings for, since we started. And we recently held a community-wide anti-racism training. Overall, the feedback has been very positive and helpful, but there are some improvements that we want to make too. And we're planning on creating a new version of the training based on our reflections of how the last trainings have gone and what core information about anti-racism we want to relay rather than trying to stretch and do multiple types of trainings at once. And also I'll just add that that training is mostly led by high school students at WHS. So our social media and comms team is continuing to post about the data that we're collecting, the communications we're having, and also about local and national news that's relevant to our work. I'm going to put the link to our Instagram in the chat in case you care to check it out. And then our data team has 3 lines of research currently. We're researching existing police alternative crisis teams that are in other US cities. Many of you may have heard of the program Cahoots in Oregon. But there are several of these programs that basically have licensed mental health providers and community members addressing crises that pretty much never require an armed weapon to solve, never result in an arrest, and can connect people to long-term resources. So we would like to present this data as potential directions that Watertown Public Safety could move in. We also are examining budget line items of Watertown Police Department from the last 5 years. Right now, we just want to get a clear idea of how the Watertown Police Department budget is constructed. And so far, it appears that instead of deeply assessing departmental needs every year, the budget more or less grows by the same amount, adjusting for inflation. So it appears that the department is incentivized to spend the entire budget every year. And so we're also interested particularly in looking at private contract details. In 2008, Massachusetts passed a law saying that we could have civilian flaggers at construction sites and road construction as well, instead of law enforcement. And this could create a lot of new jobs, actually, instead of just being a perk for police officers. And so we'd like to know why really like no one in the state has changed hiring practice based on this law. So we need to take a closer look at police union contracts. And finally, for the data team, we've been trying to understand more from a quantitative perspective about the services Wayside Foundation provides. From informational interviews and the Committee for Public Health, we've learned how much of a vital resource Wayside Foundation is. They provide all sorts of aid, both short-term and long-term, in a very relational way that is focused on investing in people. And we want to advocate for more funding because currently they have, from Watertown, just a $78,000 grant provided for the social service resource position. But we know that if they had more resources, they could continue to do more of the wonderful work they're doing. We also in March held a 4-week abolition of policing learning group. And I have like all of the materials that we went over there that I'm also going to put in the chat if you care to read any of it. And we also have grown about like 50% in the last month since the last public safety meeting and since this group. So that's kind of exciting. And our group, it's exciting to see our group becoming more multi-generational and being able to take on more projects as we expand. And we meet bi-weekly as a larger group, and individual teams also like use Slack and have their own meeting times. And also keep your eye out for a campaign launch starting sometime in mid-May, because we're in the middle of drafting a 6 to 12 month campaign strategy. So I can't say too much about that right now, but that is in the works. And then I also just wanted to share briefly some data that we would have liked to present at the Public Safety Committee meeting. So just that, one, the police department budget is about 13 times greater than the health department budget, 10 million versus about 800,000. So that's something that we see as a disparity. And also, when we look at towns of a similar population size, we see that Watertown actually spends more dollars per capita on police than neighboring towns that have a similar size. So it's about $260 per resident versus $210 per resident, or $201 per resident. And so if we were to reduce funding to just match what towns of a similar size are spending, we would actually free up $2 million. And we also, like I said earlier, are just continuing to look at both how we can invest in a lot of preventative care, and also what are some alternatives to police response that already exist. And we know that, like, Watertown Police Department and leadership on the state and local level are aware of this. For example, the jail diversion program. On WPD website says, over the last 30 years, police officers have become the first line of contact for people with untreated mental illness and other psychological problems. However, police officers neither have the sufficient clinical training to identify or manage these situations, nor the sufficient resources to adequately support people to address their complex problems. And the reason why police officers have become the first line of contact is because of disparities in funding. So that's kind of the point that we're trying to get at. So some next steps that the Public Safety Committee could do, as well as Town Council and the Police Department. The Town Council could, one, set some very clear goals for what public safety should look like and how to get there. And the Town Council could undertake a closer study of the budget every year to see where funding could be reallocated to programs that prevent the need for policing. These programs could include mental health, substance use abuse services, food security, affordable housing, and healthcare, as well as transformative and restorative justice initiatives. And also, we should study what are the common causes of calls to the department, and also what are the common causes of crime, in order to find alternative ways of addressing these where possible and appropriate. So for example, if we have a whole subset of calls where police come, but there's never an arrest as a result, maybe we don't always need police to answer that response. So yeah, that's what I wanted to share.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And Tony, I can't remember if you or who is just going to keep track of questions and things in the chat for after the reports are done, but if someone would be willing to do that, that'd be great. You're muted.
I'm sorry, I'd be happy to do that.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Sarah. And next, Will Twombly is going to report on behalf of Shivani Sharma, who was not able to be here, on the Kingian Response Team project or initiative on Kingian nonviolence police training.
Thank you, Sue Ellen, and good evening, everyone. As Sue Ellen said, I'm pinch hitting for Shivani, who wasn't able to be with us tonight, but normally she would have given our report. But I wanted to share with you some information about a training proposal that we worked to develop over the last 6 months or so for the Watertown Police Department based on the Kingian principles of nonviolent conflict reconciliation. So Kingian training is derived from the principles of conflict reconciliation that Dr. Martin Luther King employed throughout his lifetime. These techniques have been used for decades to de-escalate violence, promote greater understanding between those with conflicting perspectives, and encourage collaborative rather than confrontational relationships. Kingian training began in Watertown about 4.5 years ago when over 40 students and adults became certified trainers. Included in this group were 3 Watertown police officers, Lieutenant Dan Unsworth, Detective Patty Grady, and Officer Tony Physick. These generous officers and the other initial trainees have since gone on to train countless other students and adults throughout the community. As a local response to George Floyd's murder last spring, a group of over 60 Kingian graduates committed to anti-racist work here in Watertown came together to form the Kingian Response Team. We have been co-facilitators, that is Shivani and I, of one action group of this team that has worked in collaboration with Lieutenant Unsworth and Detective Grady to develop a detailed proposal. When implemented, it will provide a unique training experience for 60 Watertown officers over a 3-year period. And if any of you watched the PBS NewsHour 2 nights ago, you would have seen a man by the name of David Wexler, who is a national expert on police training. And he said something to the effect that police training needs to change desperately because it hasn't basically changed in the last 25 years. And now is the time. And we feel that this would be a good way for Watertown to move in that direction. The program would begin with a basic understanding of the Kingian curriculum, but would be expanded to include specific techniques to help officers deal with the extremely complex situations that they encounter on the street every day. For officers, this training will greatly enhance their practical and emotional preparedness to successfully resolve stressful situations in a safe and positive way. It offers specific techniques to build self-confidence, de-escalate volatile situations, and understand the perspectives of others. The program will support positive interactions between community members and Watertown officers. It will build mutual trust, ensuring that folks needing help from the police will feel more comfortable seeking it.
You muted, Will.
Well, you just got muted, accidentally muted.
I'm sorry. I was going to say, in addition to building trust between community members and the police, it will help community members to feel more open about sharing with the police the critical information that they might need regarding criminal activity in town. The proposal we have submitted to the police department contains a broad outline for this long-term training program. The details will be fleshed out in collaboration with key department personnel with the assistance of experienced outside experts, keeping in mind the newly mandated state training
I
requirements.
have to replace my iPad, but I'm in trouble with the button.
I'm sorry?
Nothing. Go
Okay,
ahead.
muted somebody.
Okay. Keeping in mind the newly mandated state training requirements that have already been mentioned tonight. Funding for the program would come from the department's pre-existing training budget. Facilitators would include a multiracial, multi-generational team of certified trainers drawn from both local and national sources. We see this as an opportunity for the Watertown Police to set an outstanding example for other departments across the nation. We see it as a win-win program for everyone in Watertown. We urge the department to accept and act on this proposal. In addition, we recognize that the demographics of Watertown have changed significantly in the past decade, with many immigrant families and people of color joining our community. We also acknowledge that many of the officers currently serving in Watertown have deep roots in the community and are steadfastly committed to serving the town with generosity and professionalism, for which we express gratitude. Over time, in order to serve even more effectively, it will be very important for the racial, ethnic, and gender composition of the department to reflect Watertown's new demographics. Community members, regardless of their backgrounds, should see their own faces reflected throughout all town departments. We especially urge the Watertown Police Department, along with other town departments, to continue to develop and implement plans that will ensure greater diversity and inclusivity on all levels within their department.
Thank you very much, Will. Save your questions for later. And our last report is going to be from Louise Enoch on a group that she and Chuck Dickinson and I and a number of others before us with us had been working on, and she'll let you know why, where it is now, where it's been, and why it's where it is now. Louise.
Thank you, Sue Ellen, and good evening, everyone. So I'm going to very briefly review a proposal that a number of us wrote. We were motivated by the same things that everyone else here was last June following George Floyd's murder, to get involved with police reform. So we had the idea that we needed to consider approaches to enhancing trust and collaboration between the police and the community here in Watertown. We believe that one mechanism for doing this could be a Watertown Police Department Community Advisory Board. We were joined in our work in putting this proposal together by Lieutenant Unsworth, who worked with us very devotedly. We felt such a board could build upon the efforts already undertaken by Chief Lawn and Lieutenant Dan Unsworth. And by the way, Chief Lawn at that meeting with Will Brownsberger, when I asked him a question of would he be willing to participate in some kind of oversight or review board, he said he would consider it. We saw the board as a way to deepen, expand, and formalize the efforts already undertaken with the community. A community advisory board could go further, though, toward building trust and legitimacy, particularly with the diverse newer constituencies in Watertown. In general, its purpose would be to foster transparent communication and trust, to provide feedback or recommendations between the police and the community. It could foster routine reporting and accountability. More specifically, it could do things like review policies and procedures, review the department's complaint process, review training and materials, and many other items that it could agree to look at together. In order to succeed, we knew that this would have to carry the full support of the chief. It would have to have credible community representation, and it would have to foster open dialogue and collaborative decision-making. So let me bring you up to date with what has happened to this proposal since then. Again, we had hoped for a way in, a way to partner with the police department around community issues, particularly around those issues that impacted Watertown's residents of color. We offered this proposal as a good faith attempt to do these things. It was not an attempt to control police practices or policy. It couldn't be that, as it was a voluntary endeavor that carried no legal authority and was entirely dependent on the full support of the chief. No surprise, it eventually became apparent that our proposal was not viable, given the emphatic rejection by the Watertown Police Department. Despite the chiefs having known we were working on this for months and sort of seeming to go along with it. At the same time, nationwide calls for police reform were continuing. Efforts to address local concerns here in Watertown remained elusive. Our group felt it could not walk away from our belief that some form of true and ongoing citizen involvement with police was not only called for, but imperative to ensure the most positive policing practices. While all of this was going on, all the calls for police oversight, we learned that the WPD reports to one individual and only one individual, and that is the town manager. The last time the Public Safety Committee of the Town Council did a major study of the police department appears to have been, excuse me, in 2012. The Matrix Group report cited many positives about the department, but it also made many recommendations for improvement in management, including the evaluation and supervision of officers. Does the town know to what extent these were implemented? Even with the enactment and hoped for benefits of the Massachusetts Police Accountability Law, we concluded that citizen involvement at the local level remains an important way to keep policing responsive to current community concerns. Clearly, the authority of town government would be needed to assure police participation in some kind of ongoing dialogue about its practices and priorities. This is why we decided that we would petition the Charter Review Committee to amend the town charter to include a task force on police transparency and accountability. We envision such a task force to include members of the police department, the public, and elected officials. Its task would be to ensure that key areas of police operations are regularly reviewed, particularly those having to do with racial justice and community relations. Indeed, such a task force could address in an ongoing way all of the concerns that you heard voiced here today by members of the Joint Police Reform Group. That is, issues such as budgetary priorities, reimagining policing, analysis of arrest and citation data, use of force policies, and anti-bias and anti-racism training. Thank you.
Thank you, Louise. Thank you to all those presented on behalf of the Police Reform Group. And I know we have time for questions, comments, and I think if we could start with maybe the comments that are in the chat.
Okay.
Tony, if you help us with that, that would be great.
Sure. I'm going to go mostly to questions, if that's all right. So the first question that came was, Sarah, please talk more about the abolition, quote unquote. Do you consider Uplift Watertown as an abolitionist group of totally defunding the police?
Yeah, thank you, Joan, for that question. I think it's really important to clarify what we mean by abolition, because I know it's a big word that has a lot of different definitions floating around. Uplift is an abolitionist organization, and I want to put that in context by saying we are a prison industrial complex abolition organization. So if you haven't heard that term before, the prison industrial complex is a term that's used to describe a web of punitive systems that are used to target people who are seen as a surplus to dominant society based on things like race, class, gender identity, immigration status, disability, etc. So when we're talking about PIC abolition, it's a political vision with the goal of eliminating systems that use imprisonment and policing And so given that, when we're talking about defunding the police, police are part of the PIC. And so who police ultimately choose to target and arrest and book largely determines who is going to end up in the legal system, in the courts, and ultimately in jails and prisons. And so the aim is not to abolish WPD tomorrow. Like that's not the goal. But currently we're relying on a system that is incredibly punitive and gives people lifelong consequences, or rather lifelong punishments. I want to be clear about the distinction between punishment and consequence when they commit crimes without providing opportunity to heal or repair harm or center the needs of people who have been hurt or harmed. So that's what we're talking about with abolition. And in addition to just like dismantling systems that we see as punitive, we really care about changing the ways that we're relating to each other and building up systems that are transformative and actually prevent the causes of crime and harm in the first place. So how can we make sure that everyone is supported, has mental health care, has housing, has food, things that a lot of us are lucky enough to be able to take for granted, but are actually not commonplace everywhere in the US. So that's what we're talking about with abolition. I do appreciate that question. So Uplift would like to see some funding moved from WPD to other resources in town, but we're not saying that we want WPD to like cease existing tomorrow. So I hope that clarifies. And then also to your other question, if I may. So yeah, Mr. Driscoll.
Why don't you repeat, why don't we say what the question is?
Sure.
So Sarah, you mentioned funding of the Watertown Police in comparison to other communities of similar size is greater. But at the public safety meeting, I believe that Mike Driscoll, that's Mike Driscoll, made the comment that the comparison should be made with communities more similar to us than their size. And in doing that, Watertown Police Department is not out of whack.
Yeah, so we were looking at population size, and Mr. Driscoll is absolutely right that there are a lot of ways you could compare the data. And we actually reached out to him twice and asked to get together and compare our data sets and talk about where there might be discrepancies, what might actually be the best basis to compare this data. He was looking at neighboring towns, which are a lot larger and wealthier than ours and might have different needs. And so that might be one way to compare the data, but I don't think there's like one objective way. And that's the thing about statistics, right? Is like you can kind of look at things in multiple ways depending on what you're looking for, and like that's fine. But to like improve our efforts and come up with an accurate, meaningful data set that could actually inform how we approach funding to public safety, we did reach out to collaborate, and we've heard no response back.
Thank you. Thank you. So there's a couple of other, there's some very nice comments, but I'm going to sort of skip the comments and go to the questions. Does anyone know what the current ethnic makeup of Watertown is and how integrated the police department is? Felicia, that you had one part of that answer.
Yes, I put some data in the chat, which kind of looks a little broken up, but the DESE has some data on school enrollment for 2020 to 2021. So I know the census says that I know the Black population is around, as of 2010 was around 2%, but that number has increased and it's believed to be closer to 4%. And the public school data actually reflects that 4.3% of the enrollment is Black, 7.2% is Hispanic. I'm sorry, 7.2% is Asian, 19.1% is Hispanic, 0.4 Native American, 63.6 white, and then 5.3% multiracial.
And then to the question of the police department makeup, it appears that there at this point, there are no, there are 2 Asian American officers, but no black or brown officers. That's from Will.
Correct.
Yeah, Tony, that's to the best of my knowledge, unless something has changed recently. I believe that there are several bilingual officers, but I'm quite sure that there are no black or brown officers.
Okay, and just to say that the data that Felicia put in on the schools is in the chat if you want. Let me just check one other question. Again, compliments to some folks for what they're doing. And I think, how have they tried? I'm not, this was Joseph's question. I'm not sure to whom, but to everybody. I think it must refer to the Kingian trainers. Have they trained other police officers? I think, Will, you'd have a sense, huh?
Yeah, Joseph, I believe that the Kingston, Rhode Island Police Department has received Kingian training. I think I have the community right there. And I know that Chief Denmark in Harvard, Mass. Is hoping to initiate Kingian training for his department as well. Beyond that, I don't know of any other specific departments, but I will say that the 3 officers that I mentioned in Watertown who have been trained and who have become certified trainers themselves, although one of them, Officer Physic, is retired now, but Detective Grady and Lieutenant Unsworth continue to serve on the force, and they are certified trainers, and they are very committed to this approach to police training and feel that it's been very helpful to them personally and would be very helpful to their fellow officers as well.
Will, if I could just say, I think the question is whether or not those Watertown police officers who have become trained, have they trained other Watertown police officers? And I believe the answer is no.
I believe that's correct, Sue Ellen. There was going to be a training for both teachers and I believe 2 police officers a year ago, but then COVID intervened, and I think the whole thing was put on hold. And I don't know that that it's moved forward. I haven't heard that it has.
Okay, just one question about, and then maybe people can start raising their hands if they like. There's a question here about what I believe Chief Lawn has said, this is from Barbara. I believe Chief Lawn said some of the extra funding is related to the regional malls we have and the increase in service calls. Is that so? I don't know I don't believe the funding is related to the regional mall that's been up on Arsenal Street. I do know that we were getting some money, the town, we're getting some money from confiscated drugs and confiscated material from drug deals. But I haven't seen any particular money highlighting being used as coming from regional malls, but we could look into that. And then we did this, I think, anybody have any questions who would like to raise their hand? Just put your hand up.
There's one other question from Barbara, wondering who was happy to know about the charter approach that Louisa described, and wondering if there are other models for oversight, similar kind of police community oversight or community oversight in cities and towns that have a council manager model.
So oversight is not a popular item. There's 18,000 police forces in the United States, and there are about 200 oversight boards. So locally, Arlington seems to have some kind of a community advisory board. We did talk with the chief there. And And that was partly in response to an incident there about police having written in the police union newsletter some pretty awful racist things, and there was an outcry from the community. And so part of the attempt to address that was to have this advisory board. But I think there are others in town who feel there's more significant ways to work with the police. So no, there's not a lot of advisory boards around. And as far as oversight is concerned, oversight really implies legal, a legal authority. And now with our new Massachusetts Police Accountability Law, a lot of the oversight will be hopefully taken up by the that law and the post commission that it has created. I hope that answers your question.
Anybody have any questions from the audience? Anybody who just want to raise their hand and have anything to say?
Monica.
Thank you, Monica.
You unmute yourself. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Where are the police trained initially to become policemen? Who trains them? And is there any way that they can, with a changing society, do courses to upgrade their skills from these, what they may find to be more legitimate sources of criticism? I can see communities, I can see policemen's backs going up, like, you know, every time a citizen walks into the room and criticizes them. Is there a legitimate authority, training authority, that can upgrade a policeman's credentials? Is there a way that they can go back to school for refresher courses? Where are they trained? What is the curriculum? How is that curriculum changing over time as the community becomes more diverse? How do they learn that Black people are born with innocence? Where do they learn that? Because the training at this point doesn't teach them that. Black and colored people are essentially targets. And somehow this cycle of training that is so ingrained in the police force over 400 years has to be reversed. And I just don't know who they will listen to, who they will respect, who can actually influence what they know and how they behave and what their training means.
I think Louise has her hand up to take a crack at that, Monica. I don't know if she could do all of it, but go for it, Louise.
Yes,
and then Sarah has her hand up too.
I'm not going to be able to fully answer your question, but I think what we're dealing with is an institution in our society that is a closed entity that does not want to be told what to do, that is defensive generally. That's why there's not much oversight of police, and that's what people are clamoring for right now. Unfortunately, it's not just a matter of training. It's a matter of who these people are, how they grew up, how they were hired. You know, there's many people who go into policing, and I do believe some of them are decent people, but the hiring practices, you know, don't do personality assessment tests. I should probably stop speaking because I'll say something that put my foot in my mouth, but it's a very interesting and important question you ask. And there are attempts to provide training, and obviously Will's program is one of them. It's very complex. It's all very intertwined with other complicated issues.
Chuck, do you want to take a crack at Monica's question?
I think
No, actually, I wanted to come to something else.
Oh, Will, okay.
I think Sarah was.
Oh, Sarah?
Yeah, I also just wanted to emphasize the part about how this has been part of the training of police from the very beginning in their establishment, and that police were originally created in the North as protecting white property, mostly in the South as slave patrols. And that legacy doesn't just disappear with time. And so when we think about more training, the police academy, I don't think is ever going to be focused primarily on how to see everyone as equals or really focused on anti-racism. I truly do not believe that that's going to be the goal of the police academy at any point.
Anybody else want to take a crack at, Will would like to try to take a crack at Monica's question.
Yeah, Monica, I can't speak with great authority, but I can only share with you what I've heard, and that is that when applicants for the job of police officer are first hired, they spend a period of several weeks at a police academy that's operated by the state, where they learn some basic skills for their job, and then they would come to the municipality where they will be serving, in this case Watertown, and they would be paired up with a more experienced officer, and they would spend a period of time riding with that officer and learning from, basically on the job experience under the guidance of the more experienced officer. And then I believe that Lieutenant Unsworth, who is the officer in charge of training for Watertown, tries to incorporate little mini trainings every week for each of the shifts in the department. So these are very short trainings that officers would go through before they go out on patrol. And then from time to time, I think that they have more elaborate training, but I don't know the details of that in particular. I do know that the state police reform legislation will be coming out with training guidelines. I don't know that they've been developed yet, but I believe that they're under development now, that the Oversight Commission has been established. And also that legislation requires all police officers to be certified. So every officer will have to pass a state certification requirement, and that certification can be taken away if an officer is found to have committed any kind of misconduct. So I don't, that's not a complete answer to your question, but that's as much as I know right now.
Chuck, you have your hand up?
Yes, I just wanted to come back. I'm sorry, I had to take an emergency phone call, so I've missed the last 20 minutes, but I did, Louise, I wanted to follow up on your comment about the oversight and you talked about the post commission. I think it's important to this. I don't know much about this, but I've been involved some in the last 6-8 months, but I think it's important to distinguish between complaints that individuals, want to place against for their treatment by local police. And it's been important for that to have some kind of independent authority to really be able to investigate that. And that's what's going to be allowed at the state level through this post commission, in addition to all the other stuff it's doing in training and policies and everything. But the concept of oversight, I think, is what, Louise, you were perhaps talking to about this idea of a task force on transparency and accountability. And I think that's more a question of really looking at not individual complaints, maybe perhaps look at individual complaints, but more looking at the kind of the system. What is the police department doing and the kind of things that, have been raised here about data, about arrests and citations, about policies, some of these training matters. And that's the idea there, is to have an oversight at the local level and a dialogue with the police department about these issues, about the practice of the police department, and not necessarily looking at individual cases.
Thank you, Chuck. Any other hands?
I can't raise my hand, but I wonder if I could ask a question.
Sure, and then Sheila.
So what's the meeting tomorrow? What is people's take of the last meeting that was held about with the town council subcommittee, and what's the expectation for tomorrow?
Well, I would say that we're remaining cautiously optimistic. The last meeting was a nightmare from this group's point of view, that we had been promised an ability to give a presentation for a specific amount of time in a specific order, and the whole thing just evaporated and we weren't allowed to present. So there's a lot of upset, a lot of anger about it. And these last many weeks, we've been waiting to find out whether that can be, in fact, whether that can happen. Can we in fact give our reports? And as far as we know from the chair of the committee, Lisa Feltner, we will be able to give a presentation for 30 minutes tomorrow night in the order in which we wish speakers to speak, and that we will be able to share some slides, or that Lisa will share some slides. So none of that was allowed to happen, and it was a huge blow at the last minute to us before. So there's a lot of ill will and bad feeling about it. So we're hoping that this will follow through in the way that I just described, and that we'll be able to give our presentation and see what the next steps might be. Anyone else want to, on the joint police reform group, want to chime in on that?
I'll chime in. Some of you may have seen me speak at that meeting, and I am very frustrated. I know some of you are part of the charter review discussions, but I think this has been a really great example of the lack of transparency and unclear communication. And I think we've been kind of characterized as like this rogue group that took over the meeting or whatever that is. And I think what you saw from our presentation is that we're asking questions, and these are questions that deserve answers. And for me, when I find leadership who's as defensive as what we've experienced from the chief, that the leader sets the tone, right? The culture of the organization. So that's really problematic for me. I also want to add, I was going to speak about the training piece. I think we have to be really careful about the training. A lot of these incidents that we've seen about Black people being murdered by police have been in accredited police departments with hundreds of hours of training. So to make the assumption, training, do we want to make an impact, or do we just want to have an output? And I think that needs to be really clear in what's being asked for. So my 2 cents.
And I see people asking anything that we would like tomorrow from the rest of us, or for anyone. And as Sarah said, just come, show up. You can show up and ask any questions or make comments as allowed. That would be really helpful. It'd be great to have a good turnout. Any other comments, questions? Oh, meeting details asked about. They are on the I think they're only on the town website, right? They're not on the Watertown Citizens website. And it's a little bit hard to find, but Tony, you're muted.
No, just go to the town website, go to the calendar section. It's really easy. You zip down to tomorrow, you'll see there's more than one meeting tomorrow, but you click on the one and it'll take you to the agenda, and the agenda will have the link to the meeting.
So somebody just posted what I had sent earlier to
Okay.
folks.
Right.
So there are different ways you can access the meeting.
Yep.
TV,
Yep.
Everyone can see that in the chat. Or you can join Zoom or virtually.
I wanted to ask a question on hi, Abby. Abby wants a question too. Go
I'll
ahead.
go after you. I'll go after you, Tony.
Thank you. I was wondering what specifically are we, as a member of the town council, I know that often a committee will have to do a committee report. And the committee report will then go to the full council. It's often, you know, I'm wondering what specifically you would like the committee to pass. And then the committee would then, and I don't, you know, I know the makeup of the committee may or may not pass the committee, but let's just assume that you could get something through the committee and go to the full council. What would you like to see the committee bring to the full council?
Louise.
I think that we've all been talking about accountability and transparency, and that we would like some mechanism for that to be happening in a regular, ongoing way, so that all of these issues that are being raised could be examined and there could be dialogue about them and investigation into some of these matters.
Okay. Anybody else want?
I think, Tony, just some of the specific proposals are things that the town council could support, promote, you know, things like that.
Well, I would say that it's important if there's a way to put those out clearly, because, you know, you may have, again, it all depends on the three members of the committee, but if the committee discusses the issues that you're presenting, someone from the committee can make a motion that they bring those specifics to the full council for consideration. Now, of course, you need 2 of the 3 votes to do that. But that sort of moves the needle a little bit. Louise.
Yeah, just to say, there was originally 10 initiatives that we proposed, and that we were very eager to bring to the Public Safety Committee, and that's when we didn't get the chance to speak.
Mm-hmm.
So each of our groups has a recommended initiative.
Okay, good. Abby, you had your hand up.
It's not directly related to the question you just asked, Tony.
No, that's fine. I had my question.
I just noted that Sheila's response about the accredited departments where people have been, where the police have killed, you know, Black people, citizens, that they've been accredited. And I was just sort of thinking to myself that there is a culture, there's the thin blue line, and there's a culture that we live in about blaming the victim, and that the prosecution was trying to prove that George Floyd was defective, as opposed to what was going on in the system. And Derek Chauvin, you know, in his own background, I don't know how that's addressed. I mean, I do know it's about implicit bias, but the police systems live within a larger culture. Just wanted to make that point.
Are there any other questions?
Sorry, I was just answering Barbara's question was about when the state reform law will, you know, if Watertown has addressed that. And I know the chief is planning to address it, but they have time. They have a number of months. And originally, I think it was going to be July, end of July, but Felicia, I think, mentioned till the end of the calendar year. And Sheila, I think you mentioned that different aspects have different timelines that are required.
Chuck's hands up.
Chuck.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, some of you may be aware, but in Newton, the mayor and the town government or city government appointed a Newton Police Reform Task Force that had a fair number of fairly heavy duty people involved and had some real support, staffing support, consulting assistance. And they came out with a very exhaustive set of recommendations about how to improving police operations and really in the direction of police reform. That said, it depends on where you are. But do you want to see the police department reformed and changed, or do you want to see it somehow defunded? That approach comes from the idea of making it stronger, but they talk very clearly about sloughing off things and moving it into other non-policing activities, like enforcing ordinances, for example. Why should the police be going out to deal with issues around leaf blower noise and other kinds of things like that? So it's a very exhaustive report, and I think it's worth consideration. And that clearly wouldn't have happened if it weren't for the town government, either the mayor or maybe, I don't know what the legislative body is, but they clearly fostered it and supported it.
We have town meeting members.
A similar effort, another effort's underway in Arlington right now, which is counter to what the chief has done with the advisory board, but some group of citizens is moving to set up an independent oversight board and oversight group, and that was embraced by the town meeting, and they've set up a study group to do that over the course of the next year to see whether or not that's feasible. So there's some things that are happening here locally that are really getting the muscle to the extent there is muscle of the town elected officials behind it.
Can I add one thing? Another systemic issue is the fact of military weapons being sold to or given to police departments nationwide. And Maryland, the legislators overruled the governor, Larry Hogan, to pass a police reform legislation. I'm wondering if anyone knows what was in that. And is there anything in that that doesn't allow them to get military weapons?
I think so.
Diane? Need to unmute. You need to unmute, Diane.
I'd just like to add, as unpleasant as it is, some of the people that stormed the Capitol had military and police backgrounds. They're either active duty military and active duty police or retired. So there are certain elements in the police forces that are white supremacists that send their kids to the military so they learn to be good shooters, and then they get on the police force. So it's an unpleasant fact, but I believe it's a fact maybe in other states more, not so much in Massachusetts. It's something to be looked at. So I think that we need to do background checks on people and see if they had any links to white supremacy groups.
I could just say just quickly that I believe that we do not get any.
Yeah, not here, but I mean throughout the country.
No, I didn't. No, I'm sorry, Diane. I was thinking of someone asked a question about do we get the military excess military equipment? We don't get it in Watertown.
Yes, we've asked that of the chief in the past, but the reality is that the NEMLEC organization, the New England sort of regional organization, is where those weapons are, so that when there's a protest or something, and this sort of was talked about at some point in Watertown, the Watertown Police Department can call on the NEMLEC force. I forget exactly everything that stands for. So it's not that those weapons aren't possible to be deployed by the Watertown Police in the form of calling on NEMLEC, which has them.
Very good.
And we had that right here on my street after the Marathon bombing. The street was full of military vehicles, almost tanks, and the police from the surrounding areas that had been called in were, carrying those and looking very, very militarized.
So it is now 8:38. If people want to continue, I want to be respectful of people's time, but if people wish to continue, wanted to make sure we leave time for some brief announcements at the end. But we can also continue the discussion if people feel like we have more time, we need more time to continue. Any thoughts about that?
I would suggest that we sort of wrap it up and have the announcements, and we have some important announcements to share.
Yep, it's good. Okay, let's go ahead. Announcements.
Let me do the annual meeting, which if we could. You may have gotten, I hope that many of you have gotten the latest Watertown monthly meeting reminder, which was the reminder of this meeting. In that very packed email or from Constant Contact, there was a second event that was mentioned on the list, which was our annual meeting. So every year, Watertown Citizens has its annual meeting. This is the one time of the year that we ask folks for a donation. It's the one time of the year we come together to elect our steering committee. And we are very happy this year that we have as our special guest Congresswoman Catherine Clark. So Representative Clark will be with us at the meeting. This is a great opportunity for you to consider, ask questions of her. The sort of time we will be meeting at 3:30. And for the first half an hour of the meeting or so, we will be doing some appreciations to some folks, electing our officers, hearing from the working groups. And then we will hear from Representative Steve Owen, our new rep at the State House, will be introducing Congresswoman Clark. And as you know, Congresswoman Clark has been recently promoted or voted in to be the second, the assistant speaker of the House, meaning that she is the assistant to Representative Pelosi, the Speaker of the House. So we're fortunate to have her, and she'll be speaking for a few minutes and then opening it up to some questions. So we hope you will be able to join us. The Zoom link is on the website, and we sort of have a little mini theme for this is what's the chances of progressive legislation in Congress, and also what is the situation post January 6th? What has changed and what does Congress look like post January 6th? So we hope you can come, and it is you'll be getting a mailing in the week or so asking you for a donation, but also reminding you about the May 2nd meeting, Sunday, May 2nd. And you'll also get a little rundown, a flyer explaining all our working groups that you basically heard about just a second ago at the beginning of the meeting, but in much more detail. So please mark your calendar for Sunday, May 2nd, 3:30. You'll find the link on the website.
Thank you, Tony. Any other announcements people wish to make?
I
Susan?
do.
Susan, go ahead.
Yes, I'll be putting something into the chat, and there's an event put on by my church, the First Parish in Cambridge, on Friday evening, April 30th, regarding Palestine. We're having Eve Spangler from Boston College. Some of you may know of her, and should be interesting. And there's a link for registering. I'm going to put it into the chat now. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Any other announcements?
I have one.
Okay.
For many years, Watertown has sent a contingent of people to the Mother's Day Walk for Peace. They're not walking this year again, but it's a wonderful program and raises money for a program in Boston that deals with communities suffering from violence. And so we have a team, and you can donate. There's something on our website. And also this year, we're going to have a very short little walk just for Watertown. And it's going to be on Mother's Day, and starting at 8 a.m. We're going to walk from the Church of the Good Shepherd to the MLK mural at the Boys and Girls Club. So check it out. I hope you'll join us and donate and keep that spirit going.
Great. Thank you, Deborah. Any other announcements? Okay, well, I want to thank you all for being here for the engaging conversation, these difficult topic around police. And for what it's worth, I just saw a Slack message from Sheila, who had to leave, about people who are stirring up people to show up tomorrow at the meeting to save our police, because the group in town that's going to present the meeting wants to get rid of the police. And obviously, as Sarah explained, that is not the purpose of this meeting, and not the goal of the Joint Police Reform Group, but apparently. So if you can forward the link, or alert your friends, people, to the Public Safety Committee meeting tomorrow, and you can find the link on the town website. That would be great to have lots of people there to help maintain the truth as we know it. Susan, did you have a comment?
I just posted the link that you need to register for that event. It didn't come through in what I pasted before.
Oh, great. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
Can I just say it is really important for people to be at that meeting tomorrow. Just in terms of the numbers of people, you are going to see a lot of people who, as this person did in Slack, who don't clearly understand what the Joint Committee is trying to do, the Joint Police Committee is trying to do. So anybody who can be at the Public Safety Committee tomorrow, even just to listen, it would really be helpful.
What time is it, Tony?
It's 6 to 8.
6 o'clock, 6 to 8. And it's a Zoom meeting. And again, you can just go on the website, the town's website, zip down to the calendar, hit that event, and it'll give it to the agenda, and just hit on the link. Also, if you have something to say, don't be afraid to say it. I don't know what else Councillor Feltner has planned after the presentation. I don't know who else is going to be speaking. But please, she's going to have it open to public. And you can also send your comments through an email. Every committee has a secretary, and because of the open meeting law, people can submit comments during the meeting to Angie Canellis, that's the secretary, and that's also on the website. So please just use all the avenues you can to make it possible. And I see that Deborah put the link into the chat too right now. Chuck?
Yeah, if I could, just a brief follow-up to Deborah's announcement about Watertown Walks for Peace. There's a 2-for-1 match going on right now. So if you donate before the end of the month, April 30th, using the link that she put into the chat, your money will be doubled. So if you put in 20, it'll be 40, whatever it is. So it's, if you're going to donate, now's the time to do it. And we raised $3,000 last year, more than that, and we're hoping to at least hit that, if not more, this year. So it's important. There's a good chance to make your money count for something times 2. Thanks.
Great. All right. I think we are ready to say goodbye. Louise, Jackie?
Jackie had something.
I'm sorry, I sort of wasn't sure what I heard, but you're talking about the Mothers Walk for Peace?
Yes.
And that's sponsored by Tina Cherry's organization?
Louis D. Brown Peace Institute.
And does everyone know that she was appointed to Massachusetts Post Commission?
Correct.
So.
Yes. Jackie?
I just, the Sunrise Group, they're having a march tomorrow?
Yeah, 5 o'clock.
5, so it's probably gonna sort of be hard to do both, but just
yes,
support them because it's Earth Week. This is tomorrow's Earth Day.
Right.
Just
Yeah.
want to mention that. So.
Yeah, they had contacted Watertown citizens and hoping we could get lots of people to come out for the march. They're marching, I think, from the middle school to Watertown Square at 5 o'clock. But none of us want to be late for Public Safety Committee meeting and make sure we get our reports in, and anyone who wants to speak to make sure they let that be known early enough in the meeting. But yes, it is Earth Day and Earth Week and month, and everyone's trying to, I mean, there's all kinds of ways that you can Google other activities that are going on, you know, beyond just tomorrow. All right, if that's any more comments, are we about to say goodbye for now? I think so. Thank you all very, very much, and hope to see as many of you and your friends and your neighbors as possible tomorrow at 6 o'clock at the Public Safety Committee meeting.
Thank you, presenters tonight. You were great.
Yes, thank you, presenters.
Yep. Very good.
Excellent job. All right. Bye, everybody.